That's how every great fall begins, not with anger, not with war, but with pity. They watched our world burn, cities crumbling, oceans dying. We were ants fighting over ashes, while the stars looked down and whispered, pathetic, but harmless. But they were wrong. At first, there was silence. The kind of silence that settles not because peace has arrived, but because hope has already left. We called it progress, the endless pursuit of comfort, convenience, and control. But what we didn't see was the slow unraveling of everything that made us human. Our skies dimmed under the weight of our own ambition. The oceans swallowed our cities, the air grew heavy with regret, and our world, our home, began to look less like a cradle and more like a tomb. Humanity had reached what poets once called the end of innocence. We were powerful, yes, but power without wisdom is a storm without direction. We built machines to think for us, walls to divide us, and weapons that could erase the future in a flash. We called it security, we called it evolution. But in truth, we were afraid of our own reflection, afraid of each other, afraid of the silence that followed every act of destruction. In those years, humanity forgot what it meant to fight for something greater than survival. We turned every sunrise into a transaction. Kindness became a luxury, empathy a weakness, and dreams, those wild, untamable things, became inconvenient. Every human heart carried a quiet ache, the ache of watching the world crumble while pretending everything was fine. It wasn't one great catastrophe that broke us. It was millions of small choices, the ones we make every day. The moment we scroll past a cry for help because it's easier not to feel. The moment we stay silent when truth costs too much. The moment we choose comfort over courage. Those choices built our downfall, one compromise at a time. When the skies finally split open and the alien ships descended, humanity didn't stand united as one people under one flag. We were too tired for that. We were divided, distrustful, hollowed out from years of fear. Some saw the visitors as saviors. Some saw them as conquerors. Most simply saw them as the inevitable, another force too powerful to resist. And so we surrendered. Not with a bang, but with a sigh. They came with promises. They told us they could heal our planet, cure our diseases, end our wars. And perhaps they could have, if that had truly been their goal. But even the kindest chains are still chains. They offered peace, but peace without freedom is only another name for captivity. We handed over our sovereignty, our defenses, our will, all in exchange for a world without pain. And yet a world without pain is not paradise. It is emptiness. You see, pain is proof of purpose. It is the heartbeat of struggle, the fire that forges resilience. Remove it, and you remove the very engine that drives humanity forward. The aliens didn't understand that. They thought by erasing our pain they were saving us. But what they truly erased was the spark, the sacred spark that makes us reach higher even when we fall. It reminds me of the person who stops dreaming because they've failed too many times. The one who once burned with passion but now tells themselves, it's not worth it anymore. The worker who used to care but now just clocks in and out. The student who used to believe they could change the world but now just scrolls through endless distractions to avoid feeling how small they've become. That is what humanity was in its darkest hour. A planet full of souls who had forgotten how to want more. But the thing about darkness is that it's honest. It strips everything away until only truth remains. And the truth of humanity, the truth that no alien, no God, no machine could ever take from us, is that we break beautifully. When everything else falls apart, we find a way to rebuild. Not perfectly, not easily, but defiantly. In that quiet after the surrender, when all seemed lost, something began to stir, small things. A child planting a seed in dead soil because she wanted to see color again. A father fixing an old radio so his daughter could hear a song from Earth. A group of scientists sharing forbidden knowledge in whispers because they still believed in something called tomorrow. These acts didn't make headlines. They weren't grand or glorious. But they were human, and that was enough to terrify the stars, because what the aliens didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that even in defeat, humanity never truly dies. We bend, but we do not break. We lose, but we learn. We fall, but we rise differently. The darkest hour is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of transformation. Think about your own life. Every scar, every heartbreak, every failure, they're not signs of weakness. They're proof you've survived, proof you've changed. The moment you stand back up, even when no one's watching, you've already become something more. That's what happened to humanity. When everything we loved was taken, we rediscovered the one thing no one could steal: our will. The aliens thought they had erased us, but in truth they had purified us. They burned away the illusion of safety, the comfort of control, the arrogance of invincibility. All that remained was the raw, unstoppable essence of what it means to be human. Stubborn hope wrapped in fragile flesh. Our fall wasn't a tragedy. It was a lesson, a brutal, necessary reminder that comfort breeds complacency and struggle breeds strength. We lost everything that defined us so that we could remember what truly matters. Not power, not perfection, but the unyielding fire to keep going, even when the universe itself tells us we can't. So, when we speak of humanity's darkest hour, we're not talking about despair. We're talking about rebirth. We're talking about that sacred moment when the ashes start to shift, and from the ruin of who we were, something new begins to breathe. Because the truth, the beautiful, terrifying truth, is that the fall was never the end of humanity. It was the moment the universe learned what we really are. And what we are cannot be extinguished. They had always been watching. We just never thought they'd come. For centuries, we gazed at the stars with childlike wonder, sending out signals, messages, and music, little bottles thrown into the cosmic ocean. We wanted to be found. We wanted to know we weren't alone. And one day, the stars answered. But the thing about answers is that they rarely come the way you expect. When they arrived, there were no booming invasions, no fairy battles lighting up the skies. There was awe, there was silence. Then there was fear. The ships came quietly, vast and gleaming like pieces of night cut into shape, hovering over oceans and cities alike. For the first time in history, every human heart beat in the same rhythm, not as nations, not as rivals, but as one trembling species looking up at the unknown. They called themselves the Sirith, or at least, that's what our limited translation could make of their sound. They didn't speak in words so much as emotions, waves of meaning that touched your mind and settled in your bones. When they looked at us, it wasn't through eyes, but through understanding. They saw everything we were, our violence, our art, our hope, our cruelty, all in one impossible instant. And after that moment of cosmic judgment, they did something we did not expect. They smiled. They said, "You poor things." At first, we thought it was compassion, that maybe, after all our chaos, we'd finally found someone wiser, someone who could help us heal the wounds we'd carved into our planet and ourselves. They gave us technology that could cure disease, food that could end hunger, and energy that could light cities for centuries. They taught us how to repair the ozone, how to reverse the tides, how to make the earth green again. And we believed, oh, how we believed, that this was the beginning of our redemption. But it wasn't salvation. It was sedation. Every gift had a price, though none was written down. They told us to abandon weapons, to unify under their guidance, to let go of fear. And we did, because we were tired. Tired of fighting, tired of surviving, tired of being human. We were so desperate for peace that we handed over our will in the name of progress. It reminds me of how we sometimes hand over our own lives to comfort. We stop chasing dreams because stability feels safer. We silence our hearts because routine feels easier. We accept the soft prison of convenience, the job that doesn't inspire us, the life that doesn't challenge us. And we call it peace. But peace without freedom is not peace, it's paralysis. And that's what humanity became: still, quiet, content, and slowly fading. The aliens admired our art but discouraged our passion. They marveled at our music but asked us to quiet our chaos. They said emotions were inefficient, that love was an unnecessary vulnerability. They didn't understand that it was our chaos that made our beauty, that the same heart capable of violence was the same heart capable of poetry. Over time, we began to lose the edge that made us human. No wars, no hunger, no pain, and yet something vital slipped away. We forgot how to fight for what mattered. We forgot how to dream. We became a civilization without struggle, and therefore without meaning. It's like when a person achieves everything they ever wanted, only to find an emptiness waiting on the other side. When every wish is granted, purpose begins to die. The aliens thought they had gifted us heaven. But a heaven without growth is just a prettier kind of hell. And yet, not all humans forgot. There were a few, the dreamers, the stubborn ones, who felt the wrongness of it all. The artist who painted with forbidden colors because the new order called them too aggressive. The scientist who studied old combustion engines, whispering that progress without curiosity is stagnation. The mother who told her children stories about Earth before the aliens came, messy, wild, unpredictable Earth, and taught them to love it. These small acts of rebellion were sparks in the darkness. They didn't destroy the aliens' control, not yet, but they reminded us that beneath the surface of obedience, something was still alive, something fierce and unbroken. The Shirath saw it too. For all their wisdom, they couldn't understand why some humans still resisted peace. They called it irrational. They called it primitive. But what they couldn't comprehend was that our irrationality is our strength. It's what pushes us to love beyond logic, to hope beyond reason, to rise even when there's no chance left. In their effort to save us, they had underestimated us. They had thought of us as children to be tamed. But humans are not meant to be tamed. We are meant to grow, to stumble, to rise, and to reach. The same fire that burnt our machines and burned our forests is the same fire that makes us create, protect, and love. They thought they were studying us, but the truth was we were studying them too. The day came when one of them, a scholar perhaps, said something we will never forget. "You are a contradiction," it said. "You destroy what you love, yet you love what you destroy. You are chaos pretending to be order. We do not understand how you endure yourselves." And a human, a quiet engineer from the ruins of Mumbai, answered softly, "We endure because we must. Because if we don't, who will?" The Zyrath didn't understand it then, but that was the first spark of fear. They had given us peace, but we were beginning to remember why we had once fought so hard for freedom. The arrival of the aliens wasn't the end of the human story. It was the mirror held up to our soul, forcing us to look at who we truly were. It made us realize that we didn't need saving. We needed remembering. Remembering that strength isn't born from safety, it's born from struggle. That perfection isn't the goal, persistence is. When the stars looked back, they saw a broken race and pitied us. But what they couldn't see, what they would one day learn, was that our brokenness was our brilliance, that our chaos was our courage, that our flaws were our fire, because humans don't just survive the storm, we become it. At first, defiance was just a whisper, a rumor carried between the cracks of a silenced world. It wasn't the roar of rebellion or the clash of armies. It was a heartbeat, small, defiant, unbroken, the kind of sound you only notice when the rest of the world has gone quiet. Humanity had bent, yes, but we had not yet broken. And somewhere deep within the ashes of obedience, something ancient began to stir. The aliens thought we had accepted our new order. They saw our bowed heads and mistook it for peace. They saw us planting crops in the soil of their worlds and thought we were content. They gave us rules and we followed them. They stripped us of our weapons and we smiled in gratitude. They silenced our anger and we thanked them for serenity. But inside, a storm was forming. A quiet, relentless, human storm. Because the thing about humans is that we don't stay still for long. Even when trapped, we move, if not in body, then in spirit. They gave us paradise, and we turned it into a workshop. They gave us machines that healed, and we learned how they worked. They gave us structures of control, and we studied their weaknesses. Every time they thought they were taming us, we were learning, observing, adapting. Defiance began in the smallest of ways. A miner on one of their colonies smuggled a shard of alien alloy and shaped it into a blade. Not to kill, but to remind himself he still could. A teacher told forbidden stories to children about Earth's old heroes. Names like Mandela, Rosa, Gandhi, and Artemis. Those who fought not with might, but with conviction. A doctor used alien healing tech not to obey orders, but to save those they deemed unworthy. Each act was a rebellion in disguise, a declaration whispered into the void. We are still here. It reminds me of those moments in our everyday lives, the moments when we refuse to surrender to despair. When a student fails an exam but decides to try again instead of quitting. When a worker faces rejection after rejection but keeps chasing their dream. When someone loses everything, their job, their home, their confidence, but still gets up the next day to start over. That's defiance too. Quiet, human, relentless. The aliens, for all their intelligence, couldn't understand why we wouldn't simply be content. To them, peace was compliance. To us, peace without freedom was nothing but a slow death. They believed that by removing conflict, they had removed the very cause of our suffering. But they didn't understand that struggle is what gives life meaning, that we need resistance to grow, just as a tree needs wind to strengthen its roots. And so, humanity began to resist. Not openly, not yet, but with precision and patience. Our engineers rewired alien drones to communicate secretly. Our poets encoded rebellion in verses that sounded like hymns. Our children played games that taught strategy under the guise of play. Every corner of our existence became a classroom, every act of defiance a lesson in survival. We began to remember what it meant to be dangerous. Not cruel, dangerous. Because danger in its truest form is the refusal to submit. The aliens could measure strength in muscle, power in energy, intelligence in data. But they could not measure will. They had no unit for it, no formula for stubborn hope, and so they underestimated it. In their arrogance, they tried to root out resistance with kindness. They offered promotions, luxuries, better housing to those who complied. Some accepted, many pretended to, but beneath the smiles and soft words, the resistance grew. A network of farmers, teachers, artists, soldiers, united not by nationality or race or creed, but by one shared promise: humanity will not kneel. And it wasn't just about survival, it was about dignity, about remembering who we were. There's a special kind of power in standing tall, even when your knees tremble. It's the same power you find in a single parent working 2 jobs but still tucking their kids into bed with a smile. In the athlete who keeps training after every loss. In the ordinary person who says no when the world tells them to settle for less. Defiance is not always loud. Sometimes it's just the quiet decision to keep going. Over time, that whisper became a voice, then a chorus, then a movement. Humanity started to dream again, and dreams are dangerous things. They spread like wildfire. They ignite hearts. The aliens could destroy weapons, but they couldn't destroy an idea, and the idea of freedom, once remembered, is impossible to kill. They started noticing it in our eyes, the way we looked at them, not with fear, but with calculation, the way we carried ourselves, not as subjects, but as survivors waiting for the right moment. We began to move differently, speak differently. We began to hope differently, and hope, once born, does not die quietly. There's something extraordinary about what happens when people remember their worth. It's like light piercing through the deepest night. Humanity's defiance was not just a fight against control, it was a fight to remember that we were meant to fight, not against others but against limits, against despair, against the voice that says, "You can't." And when that defiance finally grew too bright to ignore, the aliens began to fear us again. They saw it not in our weapons, but in our eyes, the same eyes that once stared at the stars in wonder, now staring back in warning. They realized that humanity's greatest weapon had never been our technology or our armies. It was our spirit, the unyielding, unstoppable will to stand up no matter how many times we're knocked down. Because you can chain the body, you can silence the mouth, you can even burn the world. But you can't kill defiance. You can't erase that spark that whispers, "Not yet, not like this." That is what it meant when humanity refused to kneel. It wasn't just rebellion against an alien empire. It was a rebellion against the very idea of giving up, an anthem that lives inside each of us every time we choose to rise again. And in that defiance, the universe learned something new. Humanity doesn't just survive the impossible. Humanity dares it. Pain changes everything. It reshapes the way we see the world, the way we move, the way we breathe. It can destroy, yes, but it can also transform, and that is what happened to humanity. We had been broken, beaten, silenced. The aliens thought they had erased the fire in us, but pain does something extraordinary to the human spirit. It purifies it. It burns away everything false until only truth remains. And our truth was this: we were not done. Pain, for us, became a forge. Each loss, each humiliation, each memory of who we once were, all of it melted together into something harder, sharper, unstoppable. Humanity began to understand that suffering was not our curse, but our greatest teacher. We learned not to fear it, but to use it. Every tear became fuel. Every scar became a story. Every defeat became a lesson. At first it began quietly. As most revolutions do, scientists who had lost everything in the wars of the old Earth began experimenting again, not out of duty, but out of defiance. Engineers on alien-controlled colonies began modifying their master's technology, not to destroy, but to improve it. They learned to twist alien design into human creativity, to bend logic into emotion, and emotion into invention. What they created was not just new, it was alive. Because every invention carried pain in its circuitry, a reminder of why it was made, and beyond the laboratories and the shipyards, something deeper was happening, something within. Humanity's spirit was changing. The fear that had once chained us now drove us. The grief that had paralyzed us became our reason to move. The loss of home made us realize that home was not just a place, it was the people who refused to give up on each other. You can see it even in everyday life, can't you? Think of the person who's been through heartbreak yet learns to love again, more carefully, more deeply. Or the one who fails 100 times before they succeed, not because success came easily, but because they refused to let failure define them. Or the parent who struggles day and night, working jobs they hate just to give their child a chance, turning exhaustion into love, pain into power. That is the same transformation humanity went through. We started to remember that pain had always been our companion, from the moment our ancestors lit the first fire in the cold dark, to the first time a human looked at the stars and wondered, what if? Every great leap we ever made was born from discomfort. Pain forced us to adapt, to grow, to evolve. It reminded us that comfort is the enemy of greatness. The aliens, the Zirath, could not understand it. Their kind had evolved without conflict. They lived in a harmony so perfect it had made them hollow. They did not understand the fire that burns inside us, the one that refuses to die even when everything else is gone. They thought that by removing pain, they were elevating us, but in doing so, they stripped away the very essence of what makes humanity rise, and rise we did. At first we rose in whispers, an idea here, a secret there. Then came voices, inventions, movements. Humans who had once lived in fear began to act with purpose. Every time one of us fell, two more stood to take their place. The aliens saw this and could not understand how a species so fragile could refuse to vanish. They didn't see that fragility itself was our strength, that breaking is not the end, but the beginning of transformation. Pain had taught us something the stars had never known: how to adapt under pressure. Just like carbon under unimaginable force becomes diamond, humanity under suffering became something unbreakable. Every time we lost, we became more dangerous because loss gave us clarity. It burned away the illusions of peace and left us with purpose. We turned pain into science, into art, into revolution. Our music grew darker but more beautiful. Our poetry spoke of ruin but also of rebirth. Our soldiers fought not out of hatred, but out of love for what could still be. Every act of rebellion was no longer about revenge. It was about reclaiming meaning, about proving that humanity could not be silenced, because silence is the one thing we were never meant for. And maybe that's the secret. Maybe that's what we were always meant to learn. That pain is not something to escape, but something to embrace, because it sharpens us, focuses us, and reminds us what matters. The aliens thought perfection was found in peace, but humanity learned that perfection is found in perseverance. Think of a seed buried in darkness. It must crack, split, and break before it can grow. Think of muscles that must tear before they become strong. Think of a heart that must ache before it can truly love. Pain is not the opposite of life. It's the pulse that drives it. When humanity understood that, we transcended fear. The aliens had technology that could move planets, but they had never learned to move themselves. We, on the other hand, had pain, and through it we learned to move the impossible, and so we rose. Not as conquerors, not as victims, but as something else entirely. We became creatures of will, beings who had learned to mold agony into creation. For every blow the universe dealt us, we found a way to answer with brilliance. Our scientists turned grief into innovation. Our leaders turned despair into unity. Our people turned oppression into fire. The aliens began to whisper among themselves. They had studied our biology, our history, our psychology, but they had never studied our soul. And when they saw what we could do with pain, how we could take destruction and weave it into beauty, how we could take defeat and forge it into victory, they began to fear us again. Because what they realized, far too late, was that no power in the universe can defeat a species that turns its wounds into weapons. Pain did not end us, it remade us. It stripped us bare, burned us clean, and taught us how to rise not despite our suffering, but because of it. And from that fire, humanity ascended, no longer the broken species the stars pitied, but the storm that the stars would learn to fear. There comes a moment in every story when the balance shifts, when the hunted becomes the hunter, when the weak find their strength, when fear changes sides. For humanity, that moment was the reckoning. The universe had pitied us, ruled us, studied us. But pity turned to uncertainty, uncertainty to unease, unease to fear, because the creatures they had once conquered were no longer bowing. We were standing, and when humanity stands, the cosmos trembles. It didn't happen overnight. Change never does. It begins as a whisper, a thought, a flicker, a decision made quietly in someone's heart. The decision to stop running, the decision to stop breaking, the decision to fight, even if it means losing. That's how the reckoning began, not with fire and fury, but with a single truth that burned brighter than any weapon. We have nothing left to lose and everything to become. The aliens, the Xyrath and their allies, had ruled over us for decades. They had taught us obedience through peace, control through compassion. They believed fear was a primitive thing, something they had outgrown. They didn't understand that fear was what had made us evolve. We had lived with fear since the dawn of fire. Fear of the dark, fear of hunger, fear of death. But every time fear came for us, we learned to face it, to harness it, to turn it into strength. And now it was their turn to learn. Humanity's defiance had already spread like a silent flame. Underground cities whispered of rebellion. Colonies hidden in asteroid fields built ships out of scavenged alien metal. Scientists twisted alien tech into something unpredictable, something uniquely human. Soldiers who had once bowed their heads now carried the stars on their shoulders. For every rule the aliens made, we found a way to bend it. For every wall they built, we found a way to climb it. For every act meant to suppress us, we found meaning in resistance. But the reckoning wasn't just about war. It was about awakening, about realizing that power had never belonged to the ones who ruled. It had always belonged to the ones who believed. And humanity, for all its scars and sins, believed again. Not in gods, not in technology, not in dominance, but in ourselves. We remembered who we were, the species that walked through fire and called it progress. The species that stared at the impossible and whispered, "Why not?" It's like that moment in life when someone decides they've had enough. When a person who's been underestimated for too long finally stands up. Maybe it's the student who was told they'd never make it, the worker who was passed over again and again, the dreamer everyone laughed at. Then one day, they stop apologizing. They stop doubting, they rise, and the world that ignored them suddenly has to pay attention. That is what humanity did, on a cosmic scale. We started to fight back, not with rage but with purpose. Our fleets, forged in secret, moved like shadows through the void. Our strategies were born not from superiority, but from desperation, and desperation is the most dangerous form of genius. We fought with everything the universe had tried to use against us, our unpredictability, our chaos, our emotion. They had called it weakness, they learned it was our weapon. The first victory came small, a single alien outpost reclaimed, a signal broadcast through the stars that said we are still here, but that signal ignited something far greater, hope. Hope that spread across planets like wildfire. Humans who had forgotten how to dream began to dream again. Hope became rebellion. Rebellion became revolution. And the stars, once our prison, became our battlefield. The Xyrath learned quickly that humanity doesn't fight clean, we fight with memory. Every loss, every fallen city, every stolen child. We carried them all into battle. We didn't fight for glory, we fought for meaning. For the right to feel joy again. For the right to grieve. For the right to choose our own destiny, even if it led to destruction. And there is no force in existence more unstoppable than a people fighting not for survival, but for identity. The aliens began to see it in our eyes, the same look we once had when we looked up at them in awe. Now they looked at us with that same expression. Not admiration, not curiosity. Fear, because they realized that humanity had crossed a threshold they could never return from. We were no longer the species they had conquered. We had become something else, something forged by pain, tempered by time, and driven by the kind of purpose that no empire could contain. And here's the thing about fear. Once it changes sides, it never goes back. The Xyrath, who had once viewed us as children, began to fortify their worlds. They started whispering warnings to one another. Do not provoke the humans, they said. Do not challenge them. They had seen what happens when humanity is cornered, when compassion is mistaken for weakness, when mercy is met with chains. We had learned from them, but they had never learned from us. In our own world, that same lesson echoes in quieter ways. Every time someone underestimates you, and you rise anyway. Every time someone takes advantage of your kindness, and you learn not to harden, but to sharpen. Every time life tries to break you, and you rebuild stronger. That's what the reckoning is. It's the moment fear stops owning you, and starts fearing you instead. Humanity's reckoning was not vengeance. It was clarity. We didn't want to destroy the stars. We wanted them to see us, to see the truth that they had tried to erase. That we were not the weak ones. We were the warriors, the builders, the dreamers, the ones who had crawled out of the dirt and taught ourselves how to touch the heavens. The universe had forgotten what humanity could do when pushed too far. We reminded it. And when our ships finally reached their worlds, when human boots stepped on alien soil and raised the banner of Earth once more, the galaxy understood. Fear had changed sides. The predators had become the prey. The students had surpassed the masters. The universe no longer looked at us with pity, but with awe and a hint of dread, because the reckoning was never about power. It was about balance, about the moment the universe learned that humanity's greatest strength was never its weapons, but its will. The same will that burns quietly in each of us when the world says, "You can't," and we whisper back, "Watch me." That's when fear changes sides, when the impossible becomes inevitable. When humanity, once broken and small, stands before the stars not as victims of fate, but as authors of it. And in that moment, the cosmos itself finally understood humanity was not to be pitied, not to be tamed, not to be saved. We were to be remembered. Whispers that travel across the void, carried on signals and shadows. On alien worlds under foreign suns, children look up at the night sky and ask their elders, "Is it true? Are the humans real?" And the elders, their voices trembling, their eyes reflecting distant stars, reply, "Pray you never find out." That is our legacy. Not the monuments we built, not the planets we conquered, not the empires we dismantled, but the fear we left behind. We became the monsters they whisper about in the dark. And perhaps in a way we always were. But the word monster means something different to us. To them, it meant destruction. To us, it meant transformation. Because monsters are born when the world breaks something that refuses to die. Humanity had once been broken, crushed beneath the weight of its own mistakes, enslaved by those who thought themselves gods. We had fallen so low that even the stars looked away in pity. But pain, loss, and struggle had reforged us into something unrecognizable. We learned to survive where survival was impossible. We learned to adapt faster than fear could follow. We learned that kindness and cruelty are two edges of the same blade, and that to protect what we love, sometimes we must become what others fear. The aliens, in their arrogance, had believed that compassion was weakness, that mercy was a flaw, that emotion was chaos. But emotion is the engine of creation. Love fuels sacrifice, rage fuels change, grief fuels resilience. Humanity mastered all three, and when we rose not as victims seeking revenge, but as survivors demanding balance. They saw our fleets burning across the skies and called it vengeance. They saw our soldiers marching across their worlds and called it wrath. They saw our eyes, steady, unflinching, unyielding, and called it monstrous. But they never saw what came before that. They never saw the tears shed for every fallen world. They never saw the prayers whispered over the ashes. They never saw the hearts breaking beneath the armor. Because the truth, the secret the universe never understood, is that our cruelty was born from love. From the unbearable weight of loving something so deeply that we could not allow it to be destroyed again. It's not so different from the things we face in our everyday lives, is it? Think of the person who has been betrayed, yet still chooses to trust again. Not because it's easy, but because they refuse to let pain define them. Think of the one who stands up to injustice even when their voice shakes. The one who risks being called difficult, arrogant, ungrateful, simply because silence would be worse. Think of the parent who hardens their heart to discipline their child, not out of anger, but out of love strong enough to say no. That's what humanity became on a galactic scale, not cruel, but courageous enough to do what others wouldn't, to carry the burden of what must be done. And so, the universe began to fear us. They feared our unpredictability, our refusal to fit into the neat equations of their logic. They feared the way we turned pain into progress, tragedy into triumph. They feared that once we understood our true potential, nothing could stop us. And they were right. But the legacy we left behind was not just fear, it was respect. Even as they whispered stories about the terrifying humans, the ones who burned worlds and shattered empires, they also spoke in quiet awe of the mercy we showed when we didn't have to. The kindness we offered after the battle was already won. The way we rebuilt what we destroyed, because that's the paradox of humanity. We are both destroyer and creator. We burn, but we also heal. We fall, but we rise higher. We hurt, but we still love. That duality became our myth. They tell tales of a species that walks between stars wrapped in storms. They say our eyes glow with the light of 1,000 suns. That our laughter echoes like thunder. That we speak softly, but our words carry the weight of worlds. That even when we die, our stories continue. Because stories are how humans live forever. And maybe they're right to fear us. Because fear at its core is respect twisted by awe. It's what lesser beings feel when they see something greater than they can understand. But when I think of our legacy, I don't see monsters. I see the farmer who rebuilds his field after every storm. I see the survivor who learns to smile again. I see the child who looks at the stars and dares to dream, even knowing what waits beyond them. Our legacy is not just what the universe remembers, it's what we remember. The choice to rise when rising hurts. The will to fight when fighting costs everything. The courage to forgive when vengeance would be easier. So yes, they whisper our name in fear. They tell their children to stay away from the blue world, from the creatures that once turned despair into destiny. But what they don't understand is that being feared was never our goal. Being forgotten was. Because if they forget what we did, they will forget what they can become. And maybe that's the truest meaning of our story. Not that we became monsters, but that we became a mirror showing the universe what happens when will refuses to die. A reflection of everything creation fears and admires about itself. We became the monsters they whisper about, not because we lost our humanity, but because we perfected it. And somewhere, far beyond the stars, if you listen closely enough, you can still hear the echo of that truth, not in screams, not in silence, but in a whisper that sounds a lot like hope when we are the humans. We remember. We endure. We became everything they feared. And everything we were meant to be,